welcome you all to Trek Wars. Alright, so today on Trek Wars, we're going to be talking about the Dominion War aftermath for the Klingon Empire. We're going to talk about what happened to the Klingon Empire, how they restructured their military, what changes they made to adapt to the new environment that was created after the Dominion War. So we're all pretty familiar with Klingon ships, but some of the newer ships, the Klingon ships, were being built after the Dominion War. We don't really know a whole lot about, and that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to talk about some of those ships. But before we do that, we need to talk about what the Klingon Empire was fighting with in the first place. So we've seen many of my videos, and you can go back, you can look at all the different stats of the different ships, and we won't go into all the detail of all the ships. We're only going to talk about them in a broad aspect. So first off, we know that they have the Vorcha class cruiser, which was their main warship, which was a hybrid between Federation technology and the Klingon Empire. We know that they built that ship in mass. They also had a huge reserve fleet of Katangas, which were retrofitted and brought back into combat. And we know that the flagships were the very large Nigvar class cruisers. And then, obviously, a vast majority of their fleet were Burrell birds of prey. There were other variants of birds of prey. And then there was the light cruiser, which is the largest version of the bird of prey, which is the Kvort. So that basically was the mainstream of the Klingon Empire. Now, we remember that the Dominion were very good about focusing on command level ships and taking them out by ramming them. So we know that they devastated the Romulan Star Empire's warbird fleet, and we know that a huge percentile of the Vorcha class cruisers were purposely targeted because they were some of the best ships that the Alliance had. Now, another thing that we know is that the Dominion ships were so fast and so maneuverable that they were able to outmaneuver the Kvort. And the Kvort, though it had strong shielding and it had decent firepower, it was all forward-facing, just like the Burrell. These ships were not effective. They were wiped out during the early stages of the war, and the surviving few ships that did survive the Dominion War were staying in the home systems and were more of a backup reserve fleet. So the Kvort was basically wiped out. Now, what we know is the Burrell actually was very efficient against the Dominion bug ships when they could surprise attack them. Now, once they've got their surprise attack and we're in a full-in engagement, the Burrell's effectiveness greatly decreased. The ship's hull value isn't very strong. Its shielding is subpar. Its weaponry is good, but it can't take very much, and it goes down quickly. So once the actual full-on fighting takes place, and we're no longer fighting a hit-and-run tactics, the Burrell, it becomes almost useless. So one of the main reasons that the Klingons are going to behave very differently, which we're going to talk about, than the Federation, is the Federation lost something like a fourth of their systems. And they lost many of their shipyards, and they had to rebuild them. And when they rebuilt them, instead of building shipyards that have been existing for hundreds of years and been building older ships, they built brand new shipyards. The Klingon Empire didn't have this problem. Their shipyard production and infrastructure was completely intact. There was no reason to build brand new shipyards. They still had shipyards, but they didn't have warriors and they didn't have ships. So now they needed to figure out what they're going to do. So the first thing they wanted to do is they wanted to rebuild the lost Burrell army. All right, so there's a couple things that the Klingons did with their infrastructures. Remember, they were building Kvorts and they were building Burrells, and they had a lot of Klingon disruptors, and the infrastructure was intact. So what they started to do is they started to build newer generation quick interceptors like the Burrell. But there was a huge change. Because of the loss of personnel, Klingon warriors are not throwing their warriors away like they used to. There's no more of that. They don't have enough warriors to spare. So every single one of these ships has the speed and maneuverability that the Burrell have, but this is the part that offsets it. They either have the same firepower as the K-Vort, or they have more. Some of them will have, most of these ships have 4 disruptors and 2 photon torpedo tubes. One in the front, one in the back, and most of these ships have a turret underneath them, which can be used to fire at ships that they're hovering over or directly behind them, so that they do not have as many open windows for the Jem'Hadar to attack them. So a Jem'Hadar could follow one of these ships, and the turret underneath it could fire at the Jem'Hadar ship, or they could launch torpedoes and take it out. Now, the other thing is the hull values on these ships are significantly better than the Burrell. All right, we'll take a look at one. So this is the Hatta Heavy Bird of Prey. As you can see, its hull value is 514,800. A Burrell is 195. This is at least twice the hull power as a Burrell. So there's a lot of safety going into keeping the crew alive in combat. Not to mention it has a forward-facing torpedo, it's got a rear torpedo, and it's got 4 disruptors. Now, some variants actually have 6 disruptors, but for the most part, most of the new generation birds of prey are 4 disruptors and 2 torpedoes. All right, so the Kai Tang, which has a hull value of 429,000, is the most common of all these different variants. Now, the idea is that they wanted to protect the crew. They were not disposable anymore, and they wanted to have the speed of the Burrell, and they wanted to have the firepower of the K-Vort. Now, these ships' hull value, like I said, they differ in between 514,000 all the way down to 343,000. So these ships are significantly more powerful than a Burrell. Now, one of the really odd ones in here, one of the really only unique things about these groups of ships is the one called the Cha Tang. Has a hull value of 429,000. It is outsourced. So in the beginning stages of rebuilding the Klingon Empire, not only was the Klingon Empire building these new variants of birds of prey, but they were outsourcing to other empires to build ships for them. That was something that I thought was pretty unique that I wanted to share with you guys. Now, of these ships, this one is the Ning Tao bird of prey. So this is the smallest of them, and it has a hull value of 343,200. So this is the smallest of the official birds of prey that exist in the Klingon Empire now. So it's obviously significantly more powerful than the previous version, the Burrell. All right, so like I said, there are several different variants of different manufacturers, of different houses, and even some outside the Klingon Empire. Now, because the Klingon Empire's infrastructure was still in place, I think that what would happen is they were building these larger birds of prey, and that they would be using the same shield technology that the K-Vort had, because that's an older technology they have had, and they're now going to take it from those large 600-meter ships and start putting them on these smaller ships. Now, these ships are bigger than birds of prey and Burrells. They're in a middle class. But because of the advancements from the Dominion War, I think that they could get that technology into the newer versions with more powerful power plants and newer disruptors, and that their shielding would be the same as the K-Vort. So you're getting more powerful shields than you've ever had before. To give you an idea like what the shielding was, some of the birds, the Burrells that we've seen are in the like 540,000 category. So these ships are obviously almost 3 times that. So the shielding aboard one of these ships is 3 times that of a Burrell. Their hull value is between 2 to almost 3 times what a Burrell is. So and then obviously their offensive capabilities are double. So overall, this ship is at least minimum twice as powerful as a Burrell is. And it lacks all the weaknesses the Burrell had. So the Burrell cannot fire behind itself. The ship is just as maneuverable. It's got 3 times the shielding. They realized that making ships that cannot fight off small attack craft was a huge mistake. Making ships that can only fire forward facing, which was a traditional thing for most Klingons for a long time, was no longer acceptable. Okay, so this is the Camarade class. There's a video about this with Venom Geek Media, which talks about this ship. And what we know about this ship is this ship was built to take on the Excelsior. By the time this ship was actually produced by the Klingon Empire, the Federation was already building Enterprise Cs, and there were warbirds out there or variants of the warbird. So this ship was very, very outclassed when it came out. They built these ships because that was all they could, because the Klingon Empire at that point was basically destitute. So I'm not really sure what they're thinking about this, and I have a theory, and it's just a theory. These ships were all retrofitted, and that's what the lore is saying about these ships. There's another variant of this ship, which is the same design with modern technology, called the K-Mag, which we'll talk about here in a second. But basically what they're doing is this ship has a hull value of around 750,750. Now, it's stating that it's having the same shield matrix, and I don't know why, of the Nigvar. That's enormous. That's 3,445,000. Now, I tried to figure out why that would be, and it didn't make sense. Why is this old ship? So I started thinking about this. So this ship was during like the time period where there's mass change, and I think that this ship was built, it wasn't up to standards. I think that they were basically put into reserve fleets. And I think this ship, though, was made so that it could take upgrades. Like, they were aware that they could not fully take on modern ships with this ship when it was built, and they knew that they would need additional technology in the future. And so I think this ship was the easiest ship to modify in up to modern standards because of the way it was built. All right, so here's the Kemaja. So it's the same exact ship, except for that's just purely from the ground up being built with the modern technology. So what you're looking at here is a ship with okay hull power. It's not great. Its shielding is very, very good. The ship's going to have a lot of weapons. It's going to be not at the same level as the Vulture class cruiser with all its disruptors, but it's going to be in that ballpark. The reason for this, they had lost almost all their command level ships, and it takes a long time to build ships of that class. So because the Klingon Empire still had a fully functioning shipyards, it was more plausible to retrofit these ships that were basically in the Klingon Empire, that were reserve fleets, repurposing them, making them Rift, and upgrading them. Like I said, I think the ship was able to be retrofitted easier, and that's why they did this. So they retrofitted these ships to make them fully functioning modern warships. Now, I believe that personally, because of its hull value, I would consider this to be a light cruiser by new modern standards. Now, one of the other interesting thing is maneuverability was still very important to the Klingon Empire. So this is the class is Moog, which is the last name or the house of Worf. And Worf designed this ship. Basically, it's got the same firepower as a Vorcha class cruiser or Vorcha class cruiser. I'm just going to call it Vorcha class cruiser because that's how I like to say it. I know it's not right, but anyways, it's got the same, but it's more maneuverable. So this ship's got the same firepower, it's got the same shielding, but it outbeats it when it comes to maneuverability. And this is something that Worf thought was a good idea. I'm not really sure how I feel about it. Like, maneuverability is great, but when you're a tank, I don't think maneuverability is that important when you should be focusing more on, my opinion, shielding and armor. I don't really see this as being really viable. So the Vorcha class cruiser was the mainstream ship, and a lot of them were destroyed. They were very effective during the Dominion War. We know the Nigvars are only a handful of them created. These ships are so powerful and so strong. The Klingon Empire, with their infrastructure still intact, started creating these en masse. So the Vorcha class cruisers, which were, the capital ship in battle, were now being replaced by the Nigvar. So the Nigvar class ships were now the mainstream warship of the Klingon Empire. Now, there's a couple of different looking variants that are basically the same. This variant here is what became the mainstream one. It's using 3 heavy disruptor cannons. There's one in the front, there's 2 on the side where the wings are. It's basically the same ship. It doesn't have the siege phasers, which was done to lower costs. But yeah, so this became the new mainstream. This is replacing the Vorcha class, is now being replaced with this ship. Now, there obviously were some improvements with the Vorcha class design. This is a variant that is replacing the Vorcha class. What it's basically doing, it's got all the same stats as the Vorcha class, except for it's going to have additional armor on it because it's made itself more bulky than obviously the counterpart with the Vorcha class cruiser. Okay, and then we'll kind of talk about some of these dreadnoughts. So they started building huge, large, massive dreadnoughts like the Romulans have and like the Dominion have. So one of these ships is the Vokuv carrier. It's going to have similar stats to, obviously, the Nigvar, except for this ship can't cloak, but it does carry a host of fighters. All right, so next on our list is the Korek battle cruiser. So basically, this is just a large, newer version of a cruiser. This thing has got similar characteristics as, obviously, the Nigvar. It's honestly just a newer version of the Nigvar. And then, obviously, the Nigvar is still being produced. It's the most common ship. It's not as new as the other ships. The design has obviously got its bells and whistles fixed, and it's ready for mass production. These other ships that we're seeing here that we're talking about, they're in this, large battle cruiser, dreadnought category. They're not made, a lot of them. These ships are newer designs. There's only a few of them here and there. But if you need absolutely overwhelming firepower, the Bortas heavy battle cruiser is what's going to step in place here. It's got massive siege phasers on it. It's designed to take out space stations. It's also designed to wipe out other giant dreadnoughts. This basically is the Dominion battle cruiser. This is the Klingon version. So, I mean, obviously this ship is just insanely massive. It is a dreadnought, without a doubt. It can take on a small fleet on its own. This ship is absolutely armed to the teeth. We don't really know what the actual weapon systems are. We can speculate it's probably 2 or 3 times a Nigvar, but we don't actually know because these ships are from Star Trek Online and there's no official stats on them. They're not like what we see in, our data books or anything like that. Everything here you have to take with a grain of salt. All right, so basically what I'm telling you or showing you is the Klingon Empire is no longer concerned about building crappy, easily destroyed, mass-produced ships because they don't have the numbers anymore. They have gone the exact opposite. They've kind of gone the same way as the Romulan Star Empire. They're now concerned about losing their soldiers, and they want the best possible and strongest ships that they can, and they're willing to take fewer ships but better ships. Now, a lot of people hate the retrofitting idea, but I want to kind of talk about it and share with you why I think the Klingon Empire doing this was a good idea. So at the very top, we're going to imagine that we have 50 shipyards, right? So we have 50 shipyards that will be dedicated to making starships right now for the Klingon Empire. I don't know if that's what they have. I don't care. This is what we're talking about. So this is what you get. So at the very top, it takes about 6 months to retrofit one of these old ships, just like we'd seen the Federation do with the Excelsior. So that means your 50 shipyards could produce 2 ships that are at standard compatibility for warfare. So, or you can build 50, because it takes about a year to build a Vorcha-class cruiser. You can have 50 modern ships. This are straight up brand new technology being built from the ground up. The retrofitting, you're getting 50 additional ships. They have about the same capabilities. Now, if you're building just straight up dreadnoughts, it's going to take probably around 2 years to build a dreadnought, maybe 3. 1 year time, you have 0 starships. You have a ship that is only partially constructed. You have no ships defending your empire. So you can build 0, you can build 50, or you can build 100. So this is where retrofitting starships is very beneficial to an empire that has the appropriate infrastructure. So I know some people hate this idea and they talk a lot of crap about it, but from an economic standpoint, if you have a ship that can be retrofitted, brought into combat 6 months later, instead of building a brand new ship from scratch, this is a great idea. This is an effective thing. This is something that a lot of empires did during World War II with our battleships and our cruisers and destroyers. So this is my thought about the Klingon Empire. This is what had happened to the Klingon Empire after the Dominion War. So I want to let everyone know we are going to be adding badges, emojis, and memberships to Trek Wars. Thank you all. Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.